I'm Natasha Chilingarian.
I'm Michael Ogden. This is Shared Accounts with CU Times. As is our tradition on this show, we like to play games. Today, I want to play 5-second guesses with Natasha and producer Zach. Now, have you two heard of this game?
I have not, but I feel like I could guess what it is.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
I would say the same. I have not heard of it, but it sounds pretty simple and self-explanatory.
Okay, this is one of my favorite games on my iPhone. I like to play on occasion, like a car ride or just, when I'm with the boys and the kids and all of that. So Here's the premise. I give you a category and you have to name 3 things in that category in 5 seconds. Okay? So that's how it works. So I'm gonna do an example question for you. So, for instance, here's an example. It's not the question I'm going to ask. I would ask you like this. Name 3 egg-laying animals, and then you have 5 seconds to name them. Okay?
Okay.
That's how the game works.
Yeah,
all right.
And are we working together, or is it...
Nope, you're by yourselves. This will just be back and forth.
Turns. Okay.
Yep. Okay, we'll do...
a little bit of a psychological word association, it sounds like.
Pretty much.
Analyze our brains after, yeah.
And I'm going to give you probably an extra second because of the lag time.
Okay, yeah, I'd appreciate that.
I won't be so strict, but I'll let you know if you got it or not. Okay, I'm going to go Natasha and Zach. Let's do 3 quick rounds. Okay?
Okay.
All right, let me go. Hold on. I got to keep score over here. Natasha, Zach. Okay, you ready, Natasha?
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Name 3 parts of the face.
Eyes, nose, and mouth.
Okay, great. Nailed it. That's so easy. Okay. Zach, you ready?
I am.
Okay. Zach, name 3 objects that have a handle.
Door, vacuum cleaner, and microwave.
Okay, great. I'll give it to you. Okay. All right. Nailed it. Okay.
I wouldn't say nailed it.
Well, I'm giving some lag here. It's fine. Okay, Natasha, round 2.
Okay.
Name 3 famous men with mustaches.
Oh my God. Pedro Pascal. Didn't Rob Lowe have a mustache for a while? Sorry,
I gave you about 8 seconds there. Okay, Pedro Pascal, good one. Who had a famous?
I don't know.
I guess Hitler.
Oh God.
Okay, well, I didn't want to go there. I don't know.
Okay, I didn't.
Here, I felt silly being a child of the '80s and thinking Tom Selleck.
Tom Selleck, good one.
Well, that's one I was on the tip of my tongue, but didn't make it fast.
We all would have failed that question. Okay. Okay, Zach, round 2. You guys both tied 1-1. Zach, name 3 insects.
Grasshopper, ant, bee.
Great. I'm sorry, Natasha. It's really random here.
Oh, no. Oh, boy.
Okay, last round. Natasha, name 3 animals you would not find in a zoo.
Cat, dog, and a pigeon.
Nailed it. That was great. I would have failed at that one.
Oh.
Okay, Zach, last question. You guys are tied 2-2. Zach, name 3 types of insurance.
Car, home, inland marine.
And the what?
Inland marine. It's a thing. Look it up.
Inland
I had to create
marine?
a course on it.
Oh. Is it like if you're like at a boat docking station or something? Like a place where people park their private boats?
I'll
give you access to our introduction to inland marine insurance course.
Oh, it sounds fascinating.
It's not.
I was joking, but okay. With that, Zach, you won 3-2. You got all 3 rounds. So good work. Thank you both for playing. I love that game. I've legit played that for like 2 hours straight. Can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Love you two for playing. Great job. Everybody else, welcome to Shared Accounts with CU Times. Coming up, we are chatting with our friend Henry Meier, Esquire, attorney, credit union legal mind, super smart. He has some thoughts on recent court rulings and the potential impacts on credit union regulators. Very deep,
Sure does.
very heady, very interesting conversation that we had. So stay tuned for that. First up, we do have to take our break for the week. Check in with Natasha.
Hey,
Hey, did you like the game?
Yeah, I did. I wish it had gone longer because it kind of makes you think of things you wouldn't normally think of.
It's an addicting game, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and there's
It's a great one to do at Thanksgiving, for instance.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, now it's glad I have that in my back pocket anytime I need to kill time in a car ride which doesn't happen very often, but yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah, play it with your older parents and see how good they are. See what their references are,
That would be interesting, yeah.
Okay, we do have a big, long interview with Henry that we just finished recording, and he was such a lovely guy. So I do want to ask really quick what we normally talk about on this podcast. But Natasha, what did you watch this past week?
Yeah, well, before I mention something I watched, I just want to say it has been really sad, and I've had to find things to watch to keep my brain occupied just because the Eagles flew away, and so I can no longer watch them.
Right.
So just background, Jackie and Shadow are the famous bald eagle pair. They had 2 offspring this season, Sunny and Gizmo.
Mm-hmm.
They're both girls, so just so amazing. Just the sweetest. Oh,
this is
so it's been I would say about 2 to 3 weeks at least since they were last seen, on camera. So we don't know where they are, but we like to think that they're out there living their best lives. And
well, if we were a video podcast, this is when we would cue the montage,
I
look
know.
back.
Oh, I know.
That's
and I've been loving watching. Yeah, there are a lot of montages people have made that are on YouTube, or on Facebook, just, memories. So it's very sweet.
Very nice.
Great experience. So I'll say, as far as, shows, movies, I was very excited to watch the third and final, I think a final season of Squid Game on Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And?
I enjoyed it. Yeah, it's a really over the top, violent, if you're squeamish about people getting killed and blood, don't watch it, but you just can't take it seriously. You can't really think like, oh no, that person. Yeah, it's just not, you have to just bury that part, not take it too hard.
Okay.
So I don't want to give away, but there was a whole plot involving a baby that I found so absurd and just funny, and just it was so absurd.
Yeah.
And I won't say much more, but it was interesting. There was a baby involved, and the whole story kind of wrapped itself up. And now apparently there's rumors that there might be a Squid Game America.
Oh.
Yeah, and I don't know. People are kind of like, I don't know. And I think we haven't had enough of this, and I don't really want to see it in America. I think that would be disturbing too.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Great.
That's kind of one of the most interesting things I watched lately.
Very good.
What about you? What have you been watching?
Gotta say, I finally got around to watching this movie. I was kind of like, maybe it's not going to be for me. I just watched Sinners that came out earlier this year. Gotta tell you, this movie was incredible. It was so amazing to watch and unfold. And going in blind to it, I would suggest is the best way to go into it. If you know a little bit, that's fine. Don't dig into it. What they pulled off in this movie, to me, is absolutely peak cinema. It was beautiful. It was touching. It was terrifying. And oh my God, it hit everything. It is now in my top 5 movies of all time. I'm going to rewatch it to kind of fill in some answers that I still, to some questions I still have. But my God, it was good. Sinners.
Really? Wow. Okay. I'm
5
excited to hear that,
stars.
because it is so hard to find a movie that was made in the past couple of years that's really like that blew me away type of movie. So I'm excited to hear that, and I will be watching it hopefully maybe by this weekend.
It ended, and I was just like, I am yours, movie. You won me over. This was so good.
So just something that really makes you think a lot after, and
think and react to. It's very emotional, but it's also musically driven, and it's a horror movie. It's all these weird things combined, and it's beautiful. Just such a good movie.
I love that. Okay, Sinners. Everyone must watch it and report back. Okay,
agree.
All right. Well, like you said, Michael, we had a pretty lengthy interview with Henry Meier. So much fun. Absolutely love that guy. So, just real quick, a few things to look forward to here as we get into it.
Yeah.
He basically, we start off where he shares his reaction to the Supreme Court's recent order concerning allowing the firing of employees of the education department. So, that happened, and he's sharing some thoughts about what that could mean for the CFPB, the NCUA, other, independent agencies, and then how might that in turn affect the credit union industry. So really, really important stuff here to think about. He gives his uncensored thoughts on the passive Congress that we're currently living with, in his words. Really, again, kind of unprecedented stuff happening here. But beyond all that serious talk, we had a lot of fun in the second part of the interview. He, among many things, shared his big career aspirations that he has outside of his career as an attorney.
Right.
Wishing he could have 9 lives there to just go back and live, alternative lives with different careers.
What a guy.
Yeah. And gave some excellent music. And speaking of movies, another excellent movie recommendation. So
out of the blue, Henry came through with this amazing movie recommendation.
Yeah. So you'll come out with not only Sinners, there's going to be another one to add to your list. So we have all of that. Stay tuned. It's all coming up next. Joining us in the virtual studio today is attorney Henry Meier. He is a credit union-focused attorney, and he is also a dear friend and colleague of us here at CU Times. Hey, Henry, welcome back to Shared Accounts. How you doing?
Thanks for having me back. Thank you very much.
Love to have you back, Henry.
So, Henry, let's just jump right into it today. You had emailed us actually just a couple of weeks ago, I believe. You said you were feeling a bit fired up. So let's start with that, the reason why you were fired up that day and might still be fired up about it today, hopefully. Your reaction to the Supreme Court's recent order concerning allowing the firing of employees of the education department. You said that when that happened, you saw that as potentially bad news for the CFPB. So why is that? Can you tell us about that reaction?
Because in a nutshell, what we are trying to divine from the Supreme Court's decisions in these 1 or 2 sentence orders is the direction that they might be headed in with regard to the ability of the court or the willingness of the court to step in and question the use of money pursuant to appropriations for agencies. So in other words,
Right.
in this case, what you're saying is the Supreme Court, at least in the short term, has given a tremendous amount of discretion with regard to the Trump administration's opinion that it can reorganize the education department and still be consistent with its underwriting statutory requirements. And the court, the majority was willing to defer to the administration's representations, whereas the minority very strongly said, no, at some point, we have to look at what's going on in terms of the money being spent. And at some point, it is being spent and they're conducting themselves in such a way as to violate the statutory mandate is laid out by Congress. But now think about the way this could be applied in other contexts. Okay. If the court is willing to give them that much flexibility with regard to the education department, then how much flexibility would they have to, they be the administration, would the administration have to reorganize the NCUA, for instance, or the CFPB, which it's already doing? So that's why I said it was bad news for the CFPB.
Yep.
To the extent you expect the court to step in and say, hey, at some point you're not conducting yourself consistent with the priorities of Congress as laid out in statute and reflected in appropriations, the court's not going to be the one to step in and question that at this point. That's the way it appears anyway.
Yeah.
So let's dig into that a little bit, Henry. You mentioned, in the email you sent me, talking about the Secretary of Education's ability to restructure. You mentioned the Secretary of Education's ability to restructure the department as a precedent. And how could this approach, like you were just starting to dig into it, how could this approach affect independent financial regulators like CFPB or even the NCUA?
And I should preface all this with, unfortunately, what we are trying to figure out is what practical implications of these decisions are that aren't really decisions. In other words, at this point, we are dealing with preliminary orders. you do not have that classic majority opinion and minority opinion, majority opinion explaining the court's rationale. So we have to extrapolate from these three sentence majority orders what the implications might be. We also have to be careful about using the term precedent because there's an academic debate, and it's more than academic, as to how presidential these actually are. Okay. But that being said, if I am sitting in the administration today and it's my job to maximize the executive's authority, okay, and I don't mean that in a nefarious way at all.
Sure.
That's my job. I'm an attorney for the executive. If I see that I can have a secretary who openly talks about restructuring the education department, then it's not too much of a leap to say, hey, why can't we restructure the way the NCUA is structured? Why can't we restructure the CFPB? And by the way, we don't consider those to be independent agencies. Remember, the core issue with all this, which the court still hasn't ruled on in the merits, is the Trump administration's contention that the CFPB, the NCUA, and basically all other independent agencies are unconstitutional. They are not independent, they would argue. They are subject to the oversight of the administration.
Correct.
So when you accept that premise and combine it with the fact that they have now allowed the education department to go forward with the restructuring, what they're openly calling a restructuring, it does raise questions as to precisely what could happen to the NCUA structure if, in fact, the administration felt the need to go along and do something about it.
Now, further into this conversation, we're going to start connecting some dots here, but I feel like you are properly setting up the issue and the discussion right now. So again, I'm really glad you're on here because there's a lot to unpack, but there are also what appears to be some very clear dots that we're going to connect.
Right.
It's also important to know, Michael, that as we go forward, I don't want people to think this is a purely academic discussion. It has very practical implications for people whose job it is to guide credit unions and to anticipate and make the best of the environment in which they operate. Right. For example, at the core of this is what is the authority of the NCUA to fire 2 board members, okay? If it is not an independent agency, does that mean that the solo meeting chairman could promulgate regulations independent of what the statute says, once we even know what the statute says? So these all have very practical implications. As we set it up, I don't want people to think this is purely an academic discussion because it's extremely important to know all of this stuff has extremely practical implications. For example, if you're one of those people who were laid off at the education department or because of the decision earlier allowing the layoffs to go forward, you're out of a job. There's nothing more practical than that. So let's understand that these all have real life consequences, and it's important. One of the reasons I was passionate when I emailed you is it's so important for the industry to understand the context in which it is now seeking to operate.
Yeah, let's get into that context.
Yeah. Well, just before we go off of the topic of the education department, that particular case, Supreme Court's order regarding them, what does that suggest about the scope of the executive branch's authority to now have various departments reorganized, especially in these areas that are traditionally controlled by congressional appropriations? I mean, what does that suggest about what their power is now? And it's different than before, apparently. How far are they able to go?
It's, in a nutshell, extremely powerful because what they're saying is that pending the outcome of the case, and remember, these cases still have to be litigated. What they're saying is pending the outcome of the case, we, a majority of the Supreme Court, believe that the executive would face irreparable harm if it isn't allowed to go forward and start making these reductions. So it's an enormous amount of power in the short to medium term. Now, it's a power that, in fairness to the court, no one thought, and if you did, you should be in Vegas, that Congress would ever, under any circumstance, allow the executive to unilaterally exercise as much de facto control over appropriations as this Congress is allowing it to. So, in other words, it's falling on the lap of the court to decide where the limits are, whereas I would argue that if Congress was more actively involved, these issues wouldn't be coming up in the first place.
So, Henry, can I ask you a blunt question.
Absolutely. I'm all for blunt questions.
Great. Are we, because listening to you, I don't believe you're being alarmist. I will tell you that. I think this is a completely logical conversation to have. But the blunt question is this: are we witnessing a fundamental shift in the balance of power?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't, and I gotta be. I want to be really careful. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not coming out here to espouse a particular viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's for the discussion at the bar. Okay, but what I am saying is that we are seeing a fundamental shift in the way business is being conducted and the interpretation of the norms that underpinned that this interpretation. For instance, these are facts. The Trump administration has now issued more executive orders in the first 6.5 months or whatever it's been than the Biden administration did in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
You are now seeing an explosion of the use of emergency applications to dealing with core issues such as hiring, filing. Okay. So it's not being alarmist. And I want to be careful. Some people look at this and say, this is perfectly consistent with how the Constitution should have been interpreted. And that's a legitimate point. It's not one that I necessarily agree with, but it is not being alarmist. And I'm not saying that there's anything illegal going on. What I am saying is that you are seeing a fundamental shift in interpretation. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's a shift that has really practical implications for the environment in which credit unions are operating.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into that a bit more now, kind of the practical implications for credit unions and the credit union industry. So, for example, you hinted that, like, even if the CFPB survives structurally, it could be gutted operationally. So it's not going to be functioning the same way it has been in the past. So what would that mean, for example, for consumers and the financial services industry, in practical terms?
On practical terms, let's say that what we end up with is, I love this phrase called a zombie agency,
Mm-hmm.
where
Yeah.
you have the framework, but on a practical level, it's doing very little of what we would normally expect of them. So in the short to medium term, I think a lot of people who don't like the CFPB and understandably don't like it would say, hey, that's great. Bottom line
Yeah.
is fewer regulations. So what does that mean in terms of fewer regulations? Well, you don't have the CFPB aggressively seeking out violations of law under its UDAP powers, its unfair and deceptive acts and practices.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's huge right there. You have even if you didn't have this situation, you have a bureau that is fundamentally reordering its priorities and is not going to bring as many enforcement actions, does have a much more conservative view or narrow view of fair lending laws, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what you end up with is, in the short to medium term, less regulation in reality. Now, this is the question I would have for people who say, well, Henry, that's a good thing. Bottom line, once you establish these precedents, ask yourself, would you be as comfortable as a President Bernie Sanders exercising this kind of authority as you are with President Trump? And that's really the issue. So in terms of the short to medium term, yes, you have less regulations on a practical level, but
Mm-hmm.
don't fool yourself. No one in the administration is suggesting that they can ignore or do away with the structure. So whoever takes over subsequently will have these statutes and laws in place. So the question for credit unions on a very practical level is, even if we don't have to worry about compliance to the extent we normally would, how are we going to make sure that we have a framework in place and still recognize that we are subject to these laws and make sure that that's in
Right.
place? In other words, one of the most practical things is, don't think that these laws don't matter. We still have a way of enforcing. They still ultimately may be enforced on the federal level, and
Mm-hmm.
we still have states that can enforce them, and we have lawsuits that can be used to enforce them. So the
Yeah.
key from a credit union perspective is how to strike that balance between recognizing that compliance may not be the top concern it is right now, but we still want a structure in place that shows we understand
Right.
that we are subject to
Mm-hmm.
laws.
I want to point out two quick things, Henry. I pay quite close attention to the CFPB, and you just mentioned enforcement actions. They have not had any enforcement actions in this administration so far. The last thing that came through was, I'm looking at their site again, January 30th of last year, or sorry, of this year. And nothing else has been done. That was filed with the Biden administration. Secondly, to your point about being critical of administrations, you mentioned Bernie Sanders. We have flat out asked the bigger groups lobbying groups, organizations fighting for credit unions who were openly critical of the Biden administration, as they should be. That's fine. But we have asked them, why are you not critical of the Trump administration? And they refuse to say that they're not. And we have shown them that they're not. It's very bizarre. They deny that they're not. And I'm like, how are you denying this? It's a very strange world that we're existing in. And like, no, we're not going to be critical here. And I think we should be critical really everywhere in a way, because it's relatively healthy to ask these kind of questions. But you also floated the possibility, Henry, that the NCUA could be folded into another agency like the OCC. Now, before I ask you this question, I want to tell you I have specifically asked America's credit unions and DCUC about this. And I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they think it's kind of a ridiculous idea that's not being floated. There's no dots to connect. But I want to ask you, how plausible is it? And what would the implications be if that happened?
Okay, so let me say that I agree that, first of all, in terms of America's credit unions, those guys are in an extremely difficult situation because it's easy for me. I'm not lobbying on behalf of credit unions A, B, and C. So in the short term, what you're seeing is very much in the interest of credit unions that have been critical of the CPB. They have to be much more cautious than someone like I have to be in terms of the implications from these quasi rulings. That being said, it's hard to look at what came out recently with the Education Department and say that those same powers could not be used to reorganize the NCUA, for instance, or that type of thing. Now, they might say it's ridiculous, and I would prefer to use the term, it's highly remote. They're on the ground, and they're probably hearing, we have no reason to do that. What do we care about the NCUA? Okay? But the fact is that the president has been set. And again, if they are comfortable with a Republican appointee doing this today, they darn well better be comfortable with an Ocasio-Cortez appointing their person tomorrow and having the reorganization powers to go with it. So again, in the short to medium term, I don't want to make it sound like I'm being critical of them. They have a job to do and they're doing it. I do get concerned, though, that we have to be looking more at the big picture and positioning ourselves for that big picture implications of what we're seeing.
Yeah, because you keep using the phrase in the short and medium term. You feel like that's what we're too focused on that right now? Is that what you're saying?
I understand why we have to be, but when I advise clients, my niche is to say, think about what's going to happen 6 months out to a year, okay? And my question from an association standpoint is, at what point do the presidents we are seeing set hurt us in the longer term? In other words, they help us in the short term, but are we going to be as effective a group lobbying as we are if what we're seeing is an extremely powerful executive in a very passive Congress? That is not a recipe for effective government access.
All right.
That's my concern.
Okay.
Well, and Henry, speaking of Congress, which you just brought up briefly there, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the role of Congress in all of this that's playing out right now, this kind of fundamental shift happening in government. I mean, is Congress just abdicating oversight? Is the judiciary enabling an overreach? And it's interesting also, even with Michael speaking earlier about how America's credit unions behave differently, were critical of the Biden administration, but they're not being critical of the Trump administration. It almost seems like Congress is behaving differently by being passive, like you're saying. Can you talk a little bit more about the role of Congress right now and, what should they be doing and why aren't they doing it?
Well, what Congress chooses to do ultimately, if they feel politically that it is in their interest to be supportive of the Trump administration, they have the majority, that the Republicans have the majority. So that is perfectly within their right to make that determination.
Right.
Okay. What is interesting, though, is that once you make that political calculation, you end up with a lack of checks and balances to the extent that there does not seem to be the respect that there used to be going back 10, 15, 20 years for institutional prerogatives. In other words, just the other day, there was a rescission bill passed. Okay. That was the president saying, I want you to pass a bill rescinding appropriations you had made. Now, he had everybody in the world to do that. But in a different Congress, that request, I don't think that's been done since 1999. It's extremely uncommon. That request would have been laughed at. So it's not just simple as saying, is Congress doing its job? Congress has decided that it is going to be extremely passive in the light of this enormous exercise of power by the executive. And to the extent that it is going to do that, there are consequences.
Yeah. And I do want to point out, within the last, hour and a half of this recording, speaking about a bit of a capitulation there, Speaker Johnson has ended the House voting term, and they're heading to their August recess already. They're supposed to vote on Thursday. And, this to me signals quite a few wild things. Like you were pointing out, Henry, I mean, it was the Bush administration, I believe, was the last time any kind of congressional behavior was anywhere in this ballpark.
And remember that one thing about that, Michael, that was during a war.
Oh, yeah.
Remember one thing, okay? Whenever you look at these statistics, in terms of peacetime, this is unprecedented, okay? And again, I'm not saying this from a political standpoint. I think people would be surprised to know just how conservative I am. But when you look at what's been done, this is unprecedented in terms of peacetime America, going back to the Great Depression, at the very least, and probably beyond that.
Okay.
Right.
And then think about this as well. When I hear about, and again, I was going to hold my fire on this one, but when I hear about Congress ending session so that the executive, basically so we don't have to hear about Epstein for a few weeks. First of all, it's lousy politics because they just made it a huge issue as opposed to getting this away. But that's off topic, okay? But think about this. The English Revolution, so to speak, the great civil war between the Parliament, that was all about after the king saying, I want to exercise my powers unilaterally without oversight by Parliament. And at some point, Parliament said, no, we are the supreme leadership. Okay. That's the roots of the country we come from. And to see this being done is kind of a huge development.
Wow.
By the way, I'm checking my notes, Henry. You are the first time the Epstein files have been brought up on this podcast. So there you go. Congratulations.
Something tells me I won't be the last. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go out on that one and say, because of what was just done, I won't be the last.
No,
yeah,
you're right.
Mark that off on our bingo cards. I'm sure more than once.
Lousy bingo card. I don't like those.
No kidding. Well, anyway, there's all different kinds of firsts on the Shared Accounts podcast. So, but Henry, let's turn back just to credit unions again here real quick. Just with all these shifts happening, these big, this is just crazy what's going on. But the fact that there might be potential shifts in regulatory structure and oversight as a result of all of this, do you think the credit union industry is prepared? I mean, when you look at their response and what they're used to, how do you feel that prepared they are for changes like this?
Well, first of all, this is one of those things where you really do need to make it a large assumption. You really can't say. It comes down to a credit union by credit union thing. And that's why I think the trades are such a difficult position. They have to do it for the industry as a whole. And for the industry as a whole, obviously, the less regulation, the better. Okay. But let's say it was a credit union that I'm advising. What do you do in an environment where we don't know what the law is, where we're not being told what the law is? And so when you are prepared, well, how can we be prepared for a situation that truly is unprecedented? At some point, we have to call a spade a spade. And so that means, again, to me, it means be very careful about making long-term decisions on how we are going to go about complying with certain laws and regulations. It means on a practical level, for instance, if you're thinking of updating your account agreement, this is not the time to do it. It means in terms of your risk profile, if you are a bigger credit union, be much more concerned about cases that could bring to lawsuits than regulatory oversights. So it depends. I can't speak for the industry as a whole, but I can say that on an individual level, it does have implications for all credit unions. And again, if I'm a small credit union, this means less compliance pressure, at least in the short term. We all could use the relief that comes with that type of mandate relief. The question's going to be, is it going to be there? And when it's not, when we have a new system again, if we do, are you going to be ready to get reengaged? So that really is the way
Right.
I'm looking at it. And I think that's the way credit unions should be looking at it.
Right. So don't just assume, yeah, this is going away. These laws are just going away. We're now going to structure ourselves around that new world. And then it comes back and it comes back to bite you. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like you have to think ahead.
Exactly. In a
Yeah.
nutshell, Natasha, that was so much more clearly put than I did.
You know
That's
what?
the bottom line.
Henry, she has that talent. That's just natural for
Well,
her.
that's a true talent.
It is.
I've been trying to get that straight in my head in terms of when I speak to my own clients, and maybe I just tape that and have that tape go with my clients.
Okay, well,
that means
this episode.
Does Natasha get a cut of the hourly rate?
Oh,
I don't know what I didn't hear that question.
Okay, fine.
I'm the executive in this situation, so I didn't hear that.
That's fine. Just a couple of more questions. One, what would you like to see happen next, either in the courts or in Congress, to hopefully restore clarity and maybe some constitutional balance?
Well, what I would like to see next, and hopefully we will be start seeing, is right now we are not seeing decisions on the merits from the courts.
Right.
So whether you agree or disagree, and again, this is what I want to stress to people, whether you agree or disagree with restructuring the education department, whether you agree or disagree with the NCUA being an independent agency or not being an independent agency, whether you agree or disagree with how many people should be on the board to constitute quorum. What we need to see are the underlying logic and rationale so that going forward, we can start making determinations as to what that future we were talking about is going to look like. And to get that, we have to start getting decisions from the Supreme Court ultimately. So hopefully the next stage of this is going to be decisions on the merits by the Supreme Court on some of these core issues. And that way people like me won't have to speculate. We will have as to how differently the Constitution is, or how they feel the Constitution should be interpreted, and then start from there. So that's really the number one thing I want to see is decisions by the court system. I would also love to see more engagement by Congress, but as I say that, I chuckle. Okay,
they just went on summer break, so good luck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I did not anticipate, well, I'll be quite honest, when we talked the first time, the biggest thing I did not anticipate is one, the hostility towards the CFPB. And before people say, Henry, how could you be so stupid? I believe that in the right hands, the CFPB has a certain populist element.
100%.
Okay. And I'm surprised that they threw out the baby with the bathwater on that one. Okay. The second thing I totally underestimated was the extent to which Congress would acquiesce in some of what I'm seeing. And that comes down to, I'm not going to call it unconstitutional, but I'm going to say that is a very unique decision, and hopefully we see some pushback on that over time. Now, in the meantime, it's been a relatively great period for credit unions. We have less regulations. Tax exemption is now secure. So there's a lot to be thankful for in the short to medium term. I'm just wondering if we're going to recognize the house we live in when all is said and done.
Okay, Henry, just one more question before we get to part 2 of our interview here. You also have some thoughts on shadow dockets coming from the Supreme Court. First, can you explain what is a shadow docket to our listeners? And then second, what are your thoughts on the use of these shadow dockets?
Okay, the shadow docket is a seemingly esoteric subject or arcane subject that really should be of interest to everyone. Okay, so the best way I can describe the shadow docket, first of all, there is no uniform definition. Okay, so I will describe for you what it is not. When people think of the Supreme Court, they think of a dispute arising, two parties getting together, that one side loses, they appeal to the circuit court or the appellate division, and boom, ultimately that ends up before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decides, they look at a petition and say, okay, then we're going to decide to take this case. That gets briefed, there's arguments, and then ultimately the Supreme Court comes up with the decision. That's called the merits docket, okay? Right. And that's the one we're all familiar with. But there are a whole series of orders that the Supreme Court can make on a daily basis regarding requests to basically stay proceedings. Most dramatically, if I'm on death row, my last appeal is going to be to a Supreme Court justice saying, hey, I want an injunction. So the most broadest way I could describe it for you is it's the part of the docket that's not dealing with the traditional decision-making process. A better definition that I like is from the SCOTUS blog, which I would suggest anyone interested in the subject should read, which is basically it's those immediate decisions where a party is seeking emergency relief to stay or put an injunction, or in the case of the education funding, for example, lift an injunction against performing a function, performing a government activity. Okay, so what you're seeing is when the other day, for instance, when the Supreme Court said we are going to let the Trump administration go forward and start these layoffs at the education department, they were lifting an injunction that had been issued by a lower court. Now, to lift that injunction, they have to make that determination that the party seeking the action would face irreparable harm if they didn't do it. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's the part of that decision that surprised so many people. Because if you look at it, the irreparable harm seems to be with the people who aren't going to get their job back.
Yeah, no kidding.
But that being said, once you look back at the history of this, as early as 2013, 2012, there is a strain of thought within the court system that had first been put forward maybe by Justice Scalia, that any time the government is denied power to do something, that itself could constitute irreparable harm. Now, again, if that's the case, then what are the practical implications? Well, think about the timing of all this. Typically, what would happen is it would take years to get a determination as to whether or not Chairman Harper could be removed.
Right.
And in another context, his term might not, for all practical purposes, be over. But by the Supreme Court being so willing to use its docket, rightly or wrongly, by the way, what you have is a system that is changes are being made that much more expeditiously and that much more quickly. So we're seeing changes. A third thing I would have got along is how quickly we are seeing the fundamental shift take place in the balance of power, which is what you were talking about earlier, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All terrifying.
Yeah,
but
very terrifying, yeah.
I will say, to point out very quickly, Henry, on these shadow dockets, they aren't signed, right?
They are unsigned. They are not precedent. Okay. So very interesting. Like, I'm talking about the decision to lay people off. Theoretically, the court could come back when it has these cases will be decided on the merits. Okay. So even though these people have lost their job, the Supreme Court could come back and say, going forward, you can't do that. I don't know if this is going to happen, but this gets into the whole area of, well, should we treat this as precedent and assume that that's really the way the Supreme Court's going to rule? Or is there some other logic that we're not aware of that we may start seeing different decisions? That's why it's so important in the absence of congressional oversight and congressional action. It's so important that everyone, no matter what side of the argument you're on, we start seeing more stuff in writing by the Supreme Court so that we can get a better sense of where we're headed in terms of the way the Constitution and the laws are being interpreted.
Oh, it's a mess. What a mess. Okay, but anyway, let's lighten things up a bit. We're going to move on to the second part of our interview, which is all about you, Henry. Now, I know, Henry, you've done this before with us in a previous episode, so we've added some new questions for you. We don't want to have you repeat yourself.
Can I point out before you start there, Natasha?
Yeah.
Typically, we do share these questions, even these last ones, with our guests so that, they're not fully surprised what we're going to talk about. But these questions, and we were talking before we pressed record, Henry does not know these questions that are coming. So we're totally, this is all free flow here.
So this is the speed round. This is key.
Exactly. So you don't know what we're getting ready to do.
This podcast. I know at least one person who's going to listen to the podcast, so I better be careful.
All right, great.
Okay.
Great. Well, so here we go.
Another shared accounts first, with the guests not knowing the questions ahead of time. So enjoy the real-time improvisation. Okay, Henry, first question. I think this is an interesting one. You can think back to, when you were in law school. What would you say was the hardest or the most difficult part of obtaining a law degree for you?
The law degree itself, the part of the law that I've always had the most difficulty with, and probably why I didn't go into litigation, was civil procedure. With the procedures that you use, just what we were talking about. It's taken me years and decades to really get beyond the nuances. I call that the math of law school. And some people have a real knack for it, some people don't. That would be the most difficult thing. I know some people out there will say, oh, it's the bar exam. But for anyone thinking of going to law school, if your goal is to simply pass the bar exam, then save your money, or someone can teach you how to do that in about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
The real challenge is trying to recognize where your weaknesses are, and try to see what you can do to adjust for those.
All right. Great answer. So, staying on the legal side for a second, Henry, if you didn't become a lawyer, did you have a second idea for a career you wanted to pursue?
Not only do I have an idea, but
Mm.
my goal, Michael, just so you know, and Natasha, is to figure out what I want to do with my life before I retire. Okay?
Yeah.
When I hear people ask these kids and my daughters, like, what do you want to do? Or
Yeah.
like, my daughter is 16. She's going to go to her first round of school visits tomorrow. And they're going to ask the kids, well, what do you think you might want to major in?
Wow.
I still don't know what it is I want to do. So I will give you several options, though, one of which will explain why I have such a sore spot for you guys, which is my first dream job would have been a sports writer for the New York Times covering the Yankees. Okay.
Wow.
And to this day, I love sports.
Yeah.
I actually went to school for journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And then second dream job would be as a writer, a novelist. Okay.
Nice.
Third dream job would be as a professor. Fourth dream job would probably be exactly what I'm doing now, which is not bad. So
fourth on the list.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah. Well, if we could all have, yeah.
Henry, I was a sports reporter in the previous gig for a long time. Hated every second of it. I'm sure you would be fantastic at it.
Yeah.
I did not enjoy it.
It depends. When I say I will toot my own horn. A long time ago, when I was a senior in high school, I actually won the award for the best sports writer in Nassau County.
Oh, wow.
So I had big ambitions. But what I will say is my wife always likes to point out, whenever I talk about what could have been different, my assumption is always that I'd end up running for the New York Times and not, let's say, the Times Union in Albany. Okay?
Right.
Your point is well taken.
Okay. I love it.
Yeah. Well, just two quick comments on that before I ask my next question. First of all, I think that would be so much fun, and you would love being a sports writer or even a novelist.
I would love to read.
You probably would be living in a maybe not as nice house now, or driving not as nice of a car potentially, just with the whole, you know.
Well, my compromise is I shouldn't overplay the sports side of it. I would gladly have been a regular beat reporter as well. As a matter of fact, I will I'll add you two more, which is I think the best publication in the world right now is The Economist. If they would just let me write free of charge for The Economist for like 2 or 3 days, that would be the happiest moment of my life. So if you guys know anyone in The Economist who could make that happen, please help me out with that one.
Will do.
Secondly, Wall Street Journal is phenomenal. But another thing I would have loved doing is to have been a professor as well. So that's why you shouldn't be surprised. I love to go off on this stuff.
Right.
Jesus, you have a lot of ideas for other careers.
I suffer from occupational ADD. That's what I tell my kids. Don't think so much in terms of the job you want, but the skill you want.
Okay. Great.
And this is another thing, in addition to everything I said in the first part, with which someone's going to vehemently disagree. I'm actually a fan of a liberal arts degree because I still believe that to the extent that you can write and articulate, you can do two things that very few people, unfortunately, can do these days. And there's going to be a need for it in just about any profession you go into. And I mean any profession.
Totally agree.
Absolutely. So let's going back to the sports topic. If you could magically just get rid of one Major League Baseball team, which team would you choose?
Oh, this is where I'm going to show my political instincts. I would get rid of the Pittsburgh Pirates. I am tired of people saying, well, they can't compete. No. They choose not to compete. Okay? And to the extent that you don't have the money or resources or inclination to put on a competitive team that people should be willing to watch and pay money for, then I don't know why they exist. So without a doubt, it's not the big teams. By the way, to all you Pittsburgh fans out there, why is it acceptable that the Milwaukee Brewers outspend you by hundreds of millions of dollars over the last decade? Not the Yankees, the Milwaukee Brewers. So at some point, it's actually very analogous to some of the credit union debates I hear. I don't believe in, well, I better be careful with that one. let's just say that if you don't want to compete, then fold up shop and don't compete in, which is what the Pittsburgh Pirates should do.
Oh my God. I was so excited when I thought of that question for you, Henry. And I was really thrilled for whatever you were going to say to it. But
You probably thought I was going to say the Red Sox.
I honestly did think you would say the Red Sox. Okay.
But I love the good rivalries.
In defense of Pittsburgh, really quick, I visited there in the last couple of years. They have gotten their act together downtown. It's a much nicer city than it used to be. That's all I'll
Mike,
say.
the city is phenomenal. And let me back up a little. Every time I have this conversation, there's someone who defends the city.
Oh,
Okay,
I don't.
so
Yeah.
I have no doubt that the city is phenomenal. And when you talk about getting back into politics, look at what Pittsburgh has done to reimagine itself
Right.
in a post-industrial age,
No.
and look at what they've done is amazing. So
I think your team take is amazing. I think it's a great answer, by the way. I think you're dead on. Okay, we do have to wrap this up. We got two more questions here. Now, since you've answered our music question before, which is, what was the last album, CD, whatever that you bought, I want to ask this. Is there a band or a song that when you hear it, it just makes you feel good?
oh yeah, the song is actually one that I got from my brother, Three Little Birds by Bob Marley.
Oh, yeah.
And when I am depressed, okay, that's the song I put on. I cannot listen to that song without smiling. So
What a
that
good
would be the
pick.
song that I would point to.
Okay.
Very nice.
That's a
All right.
beautiful answer. Thanks, Henry.
Add that to our Spotify
Yep.
shared accounts playlist for sure. Okay, final question here, Henry. If this is again going with the same theme we always end with movies, what's a recent movie you watched that you would recommend to us?
Okay, let me set the stage. So I go to Long Island to visit my brother, and he has the idea in this beautiful day that we're at the time to go watch a movie. All right.
Okay.
And I don't know the name of the movie, and the plot line is really strange, but I humor my brother. He's my twin. So we go. The movie was Life of Chuck. I believe that's the name anyway. Okay.
Okay.
It's based on a Stephen King novel. That is the most fascinating, uplifting, thought-provoking, entertaining movie that I've seen in years. Now that being said,
Wow.
it won't get nominated for an Oscar, but I believe It's a Wonderful Life of this era. I believe it's going to end up being that popular. It's just a phenomenal movie at a time when we're talking about so much negativity.
Mm-hmm.
To see how he addresses the negativity and shows that we all should ultimately still be happy and cherish what we have. It's a really special, great movie.
Nice.
Now, if I could add one more thing, as a result of that movie, I started reading Stephen King. And let me tell you, that guy is underrated. If it's possible for someone who's that popular to be underrated, he's a good writer. He doesn't get the credit for being a phenomenal writer.
So Life of Chuck has been on my watch list. It's not streaming anywhere just yet, but it is very highly rated, Henry, just so you know. Mike Flanagan's the director. He is actually, just so you know, if you're interested, he is directing a new version, kind of redoing the original The Exorcist. He's going to go after
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah. This looks like a phenomenal movie. I look forward to watching it, and I love your recommendation.
I tell everyone to see it. I really do that because I feel the same way about book recommendations that I do about movie recommendations. A lot of times we just have different tastes. But
Yeah.
I haven't enjoyed going to a movie and walking out of a movie. I felt better after watching the movie. And I got to tell you,
That's
you're
nice.
going to hear what I have to say if you go see it. You're going to say, anyone listening to this is going to, the first 10 minutes is going to be like, what is he, nuts? I'm never going to listen to this guy again. Just watch the whole movie. Okay. That's my only thing.
Okay.
Oh, fantastic.
Excellent.
Great.
All right. Well, Henry, we have come away with not only some interesting insights about, just with the CFPB, NCUA, and that whole topic, but also some excellent recommendations for our downtime. So thank you for that. So yeah, Henry, thank you so much again for joining us. A lot of fun. And yeah, we hope to have you back again in the near future as things continue to unfold.
Any time, as you can see. And it's good to periodically look at this in terms of stages. So
Definitely.
once again, thank you both. I enjoyed
Thank
the
you,
conversation. If you guys want to call me up at like 10 o'clock at night and just chat some more,
Sure.
I'm always looking to talk. It's what I don't like about working on my own. I don't really get the level of interaction that I used to when I was, let's say, lobbying. So anytime you guys want to chat, just call me up.
Thank you so much, Henry.
Love that. Okay. To our listeners, thank you for downloading today's show. Please subscribe to Shared Accounts with CU Times in all of the normal podcast places. And please share the episodes with everyone you know, coworkers, relatives, friends, pets. You know the drill.
Exactly. Feel free to rate us too, as always. Thank you to our producer, Zach Nyheisel. Thanks, Zach. Join us again next week for a new episode of Shared Accounts with CU Times. Until then, thanks for listening.